Welcome to our International Project Management video. We will explain a few topics covered in class. For that, we find here the IPM crew. We are Tomás Escorcia Vázquez, Juan Simón Gómez Guzmán, Anton Hoffman Lorsen, Carlos Esteban Duque Bolívar, and last but not least, Diego Andrea Vers Salazar. In this video, we will cover several things. Our agenda will be what is project management, what is SWOT analysis, and cultural challenges in international teams. After a brief explanation, we will be talking about a few examples. So, what is project management? It could be said that project management it is the initiating, planning, executing, controlling, and closing the work of a team to achieve specific goals and meet specific success criteria at the specified time. As you can see here, we have several key ideas, which are time, goals, objectives, teams, time frames. So it is very important that we consider the planning because it will guarantee that either our project is a success or we will be syncing with our project within our teams. In addition, we can now also talk about international project management, and it can be argued that international project management is becoming increasingly important in today's global business world, where businesses are continuing to expand into new countries and markets, either to increase their market share or to reduce costs by utilizing more efficient resources than they are found in their home countries. So, international project management requires unique tools and techniques to give international projects a greater chance of success. Out of this, it is of utmost importance that we consider cultural awareness, as we will see later in this video that culture plays a major role. So now, I leave you to Diego that will explain the following item.
So, thank you very much, Esteban. Now, what is a SWOT analysis? A SWOT analysis is very simple, but a powerful tool to help develop a business strategy, whether building a startup or guiding an existing company. However, as we have seen in class, it is possible to use a SWOT even for a project or a country. For instance, if you want to expand your business into a new country or new countries, if you're taking more than one, you conduct a long list, and then after having reduced your long list into a short list, you're going to set up a SWOT analysis to analyze your possible new target market. So, what is a SWOT analysis? SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A major mistake done by many is not applying the SWOT accordingly. Having said that, strengths and weaknesses have to be analyzed from an internal view. In this case, in a case of a company, possible questions to answer were, what are our strengths or our weaknesses? The answer here could be skilled or experienced employees, patents, and so on. In terms of weaknesses, a possible answer could be lack of resources, of course. In addition to that, the opportunities and threats have to be taken into account. Important, they have to be seen from the outside, external perspective. Those 2 points would be related to competition, prices of raw materials, or even new trends such as digitalization. In our point of view, each business should have a SWOT analysis. Furthermore, a SWOT analysis is a dynamic tool. The environment changes, so does the SWOT of a firm. To conduct a useful SWOT, it is important to have different people from different areas in between the company. This will allow to have a broader view with different insights without any biases.
Thank you very much, Diego. Now we will go to Tomas that will explain the challenges with culture.
In international project management, there is a key feature to always take into account which relates to the international portion of the name itself. When managing a team of people with multicultural backgrounds, you will have to know how to identify certain elements of culture to keep an eye out for issues that might come up. The most important ones we have identified are language, When working with people from different countries, you might have to work in various languages, which can impose a challenge, and even sometimes when using the same language, some regions can have accents that make it harder to understand than others. Body language can also impose a challenge, since some aspects of your position and expression can reveal your attitude and can even become disrespectful. This takes us to talk about personal space, which is also hard to manage. When working in a multicultural environment, personal space can be viewed differently. In proxemics, space can be divided into public space, which is the furthest away and usually used to speak to larger groups, social space, which is closer and usually used to start a conversation, personal space, which is reserved for friends and family, and intimate, which kind of speaks for itself. Even though the study of proxemics has certain standards, where one ends and the other begins usually varies depending on the region where you're from. Time is usually one of the hardest to get right, since some cultures are not used to making their schedule down to the second, and being late or even early might be a sign of disrespect or anxiety. Even though it seems to be the most universal term, it is the one that might give you the most complications. Finally, I'll talk about power. It is important to note that not all countries view power in the same way. For some, a boss or someone in a position of power is distant and has few interaction other than to dictate or mandate. In other cultures, there is a much more collaborative environment, where a boss will be closer to his employees and will allow them to participate in decision-making processes. I will now introduce you to Anton, which will talk about an interesting example.
Thank you, Thomas. Going further into depth and trying to put some examples on how cultural behavior could affect teamwork. If we just firstly dive into language, not only Thomas comment on not only the difference in accents and body language, but you can also go deeper and understand how you actually use language. So, for example, some cultures can be very direct and some other cultures can be very indirect. And the classical example is that if you have a Chinese colleague with an American colleague giving feedback to each other, the American colleague will be very direct, whereas the Chinese colleague will maybe find that very offensive and is much more indirect, which means that this can even be annoying from the American because they don't understand what the Chinese counterparty wants to say. Going into personal space also relates to how you greet each other, especially doing business, not only within groups, but also across groups. So the classical example is the American that want to shake hands, whereas, for example, in the Middle East, you actually want to kiss. Considering time, a very applied example is here in Colombia, ahora does not mean now. So just trying to understand what context you're in and what colleagues you're with, and trying to minimize any misunderstandings in order to reach deadlines. And considering power, this very much relates, as Thomas argues, considering decision making. The classical example is that in China you want to dictate, whereas in the US you want to mandate, you want to empower your employees in order to achieve coherent teamwork.
As we have seen, the SWOT analysis is a very important tool in order to develop a proper planning and to develop a proper international project. Right now, we're going to see a real case of a real company, Experiencia Colombiana, developing their own SWOT analysis. And let's start with the strengths. They have a very good commercial management in the local market. They have a high negotiating power with their suppliers. They have a very good logistical structure in Colombia, a very good reputation with their suppliers and clients, and a corporate structure in the US. Their weaknesses consist on lack of suppliers, according to their growth, a standardized quality control system, lack of communication between teams, and accurate financial information, undefined function and roles, and a weak commercial team in the US. Now that we have talked about the internal factors that a company must consider, Now we are going to talk about the external factors. Let's start with opportunities. Lack of formal suppliers in the agricultural market. Clearly, the agricultural market is the market where Experiencia Colombiana works. Growth of retailers in Colombia. There's a very important social trend focused on healthy consumption. Governmental support for agricultural businesses. And threats are exporter focusing on local market, farmers selling directly to retailers, legal sanctions due to administrative disorganization, high fluctuation of the agricultural prices, and of course, as always, the exchange rate volatility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us for our video. As you can see here, we have a little bit of the references, and it was a pleasure to share with you a couple of the topics that we saw in the International Project Management class. Thank you.